So, if you are a B2B marketer today, there's a 50% chance that both you and the person you're trying to sell to are millennials. People like me. People who were born somewhere between 1980 and 1995. People who are at their maybe second or maybe third job by now. People who are slowly but very steadily venturing into a position of power. Now, it has been estimated in the current study that 75% of B2B purchasing decisions will be made by millennials in 2025. Now, why is that important? It's important because millennials are the first generation who are used to buying most of the things they want and need online. And they show an incredible amount of mobility while doing that, right? So they buy things on the fly, they go back and forth between different devices. They expect convenience, they expect speed, they expect availability and value-added services. And they know a bad B2B experience when they see one, right? So if you look at the B2B market, however, out of 1.3 trillion euros in total revenue made in a key market like Germany last year alone, only 25% were made through digital channels. And there was a current study where companies said that only 20% of them actually don't sell online or via digital channels at all. So it seems to me like there is quite some room left for companies to raise their digital B2B commerce. Now, my name is Philipp Bruns. I am the head of strategy at DEPT Germany. We are a full-service digital agency uniting creativity, technology, and data. And what we do is we combine those things into valuable brand and customer experiences. And I am very excited to be here today in Berlin together with Marc, and we will have about 30 minutes to talk about B2B commerce. So, Marc, care to say a few words about yourself?
Sure. Exciting times. Yeah, I'm Marc, and I'm the product manager for our intelligence cloud, especially for the personalization topics, which I think is very important to have in a B2C, but also in a B2B world, which I guess we will be talking about.
Apparently, yes. Yeah, it's a good keyword. So in preparation for this talk, I visited some of the websites of B2B projects we did over the past few months, and I was on a web shop. What they do is they sell all sorts of equipment to manufacturers, to construction companies, forklifts, storage solutions for warehouses and such things, right? So it's like the essence of B2B, And what was really striking when I visited their website, there was this huge banner saying, okay, we have Black Week now. And I was wondering, so how much of B2C things like Black Friday, like Black Week, how much of that is there in B2B these days?
Very good question. I think there is still too little. There should be more, definitely. But this is a great example of sort of a B2C-aration of the B2B market. Black Week is all over the place now. We have Cyber Monday coming up. We have Christmas coming. So it's the e-commerce holidays, if I may call them like that. Yeah. And it makes sense. I mean, people want to save money, doing transactions, purchasing goods. You want to do it in the B2C world, and you want to do it in the B2B world, right? You want to save money because you may need this money. You may need budget for different parts, for different things. Forklifts, you just mentioned, I guess, are a bit expensive. So I think it's a great way of reaching out to millennials, of reaching out to individuals who are adept at, shopping these days in a B2C market. So I think, as I said, there's still too little B2C in B2B. There should be more, but there are a lot of strategies and a lot of tactics you can use just by looking at the B2C market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in my experience, what we usually talk about when we talk about B2C is we talk about a customer experience, right? So we talk about an experience which starts at the very beginning of the journey and it goes all the way through the customer retention. And what is interesting to me is that this really only works if you have a good idea of who those people are that you want to sell things to or that you want to reach with whatever it is that you're doing, right? So really get to know your customers, get to know their backgrounds, get to know their motivation. We have projects that we do where you try to sell the exact same thing to one person on the other side, and that person may, for example, they just became a parent, right? So for them, it's really important to get things done quite quickly. They need to be home in time. Then they're just trying to sell exact same thing to another person, maybe even in the same company, and they have a completely different mindset. They have completely different motivations. Maybe they want to get ahead. Maybe they're looking for a way to distinguish themselves, right? So it's the same company, it's the same things that are being sold, but it's sold to two entirely different people. And in my experience, that is something which really cannot be stressed enough, that people always think it's because B2B is kind of company interacting with another company, but it's always people making business with other people, right?
Absolutely. I think there is a common misconception that B2B is very rational, very technical, sometimes even boring, and that only B2C is, exciting, that it's about people, it's about storytelling, it's about products. But I think as we move into a more and more sort of digital world in commerce, and it's not commerce per B2B and per B2C, I think it's a mashup of both worlds, basically. Yeah. And what we see is that expectations and demands are being taken into the world of B2B. So, I don't know, in the morning maybe, you purchase goods for yourself, which you might be doing again in the afternoon. But in between, you're not only a B2B buyer, you're someone who has experienced a great many deal of exciting things. You're being told that the brand is important. You just want to buy something, right? You have an experience, an incredible experience at best, which I think is oftentimes missing in the B2B world. And I think that's why many people still believe that B2B is very technical, very dull, very boring, but it isn't. I mean, it's as exciting as buying things as a parent, or being communicated to as an individual in the B2C world.
Or it could be, at least, right?
It could be. It should be.
It should be, yeah. Yeah, we had this the project like a few years back for one of these huge shipping companies, right? And they were facing the challenge that most of shipping, you always think that it's one big company trying to move an extreme amounts of goods and services all over the world, and this is what these companies are for. When actually most of the market is people and smaller organizations trying to send really small amounts. They have maybe one container, maybe up to 5, maybe maximum 10 per year, right? And we really went into that mindset and tried to understand what drives these people. And we had this example of a person who founded a backpack, kind of like a backpack brand made from like PET bottles in, I think it was Vietnam. And what you realize is that he only had money for 1 or 2 shipments per year, and everything that his company owned was in that 1 or 2 containers. So if that goes missing, if something goes wrong, if that doesn't arrive in time, he goes bankrupt, right? So you realize how much risk is involved with this decision for him. And based on that knowledge, based on that insight, we also realized that we cannot really give him a guarantee that there's nothing going wrong, right? We've just seen this thing in the Suez Canal with everything being blocked and everybody waiting in line. So there is no guarantee that these things don't happen. But what he needed was some sort of peace of mind that if something happens, somebody will be there for him. And that is the key insight that we use to kind of look at the entire customer journey and make sure that this motivation is appropriately handled at all times, right? So this is one of these examples.
Yeah, I think it's a very good example because it shows and tells that the B2B market is sort of moving from an anonymous buyer into an individual, and many individuals buying. And you want to, engage with the brand. You want to engage with people, with real people, rather than with the company itself or the mere product, for instance.
So basically, we're at the topic of customer centricity at this point, right? So we're trying to really not think about the business, not think about the processes too much, but really put the people you're trying to reach at the center of everything you do.
And I think you should, as a B2B company, you should ask yourself just one simple question. Why should you not be customer obsessed? Why should you not be, customer objectified? Like, why isn't the customer start and center of every of your, deals of whatever you do whenever you start? I think there is no good answer to it, because why, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's an interesting development, because I think customer centricity is one of these kind of like these industry buzzwords where everybody's talking about it. Like, few people are actually really good at doing it, but like everybody's talking about it. It's in every keynote, on every panel, people have that. And I kind of have this feeling that there is this development in a way that people really want to go into customer centricity, and that kind of makes everything a little bit more the same. So everybody's just focusing on what they want, but they kind of forget their own brand, their own company in that process. So I would really like to expand the concept of customer centricity and rather talk about a brand and customer experience, because you really have to make that connection. You really have to get both of those things together to really create a great experience, right?
Yeah. I mean, my favorite example of a very brilliant and good and successful B2C company is Netflix, for instance. Mm-hmm. Netflix basically knows what you're watching day in, day out, right? And they, because they know, they can create things like The Witcher and Stranger Things, these Netflix originals, mm-hmm. which are hugely successful. Why can they do this? Because they know their customers. They know what customers want to see. They know what you're different than I am from a watching experience, I guess. And they know, it's about the individual. And this is also very customer obsessed and customer centric, to really release things that are important to you, but other things might be important to someone else. And I think Netflix is a very great example of becoming customer obsessed in the B2C market, which I think could be a template for B2B companies to be as customer centric, as customer obsessed, and as caring for their customers as Netflix does, for instance.
Yeah, it's an interesting proposition, right? Because you see, if we look at one of these B2B examples, it's a problem that many B2B companies that we have worked with at least have, is there was, for example, a company that produces the insides of vending machines, like components for vending machines, right? And what happened to them is that their buyers, their potential buyers, they realized that they can get basically the same thing at 1/3 of the price from China or somewhere from Asia, So why would I buy something from you at triple the price? So you have to come up with a solution to that problem, and a lot of companies have that. And what I found particularly interesting about that company was that they did not do the first thing that comes to mind was, okay, we have to cut costs, we have to be cheaper, we have to compete on price. But actually what they did is they kind of slowed down for a minute, and then they looked at themselves and they looked, what are we good at? What do we stand for? What is important to us? And they realized that what is important to them is all kinds of service components. And that's what they came up with. We did service design projects for them where we really looked at how can we help our buyers better integrate these components that we sell into their entire process, into their entire production process, into their products. And they became known for these product and service hybrids. And this kind of elevated them above this need to compete on price, because they found it in themselves that as a European company, as a German company, that was really what they could stand for the service component, right? And this is what I find really peculiar about these cases, that you can have somebody not only thinking about what do customers want, yes, that's of course the driving factor, what are their needs, what are their motivations, but also what am I good at, what are my strengths, what do I want to do, what do I want to see in the world, and bringing those two spheres together.
Yeah, and I think as a brand, as a company, as an organization, you need to create a form or a level of stickiness, right? You want that people stick with you. And I think you best do it by creating value, by creating things that are important to the buyer, actually. Yeah. If you compete on price and products, you will lose in a globalized world. I'm absolutely convinced that this is not the way to go. But you should, and even I would even say you must, create value, you must create stickiness, you must manage your brand as something that is important to people who buy from you, because it is. I mean, even in the B2C world, there are so many shops, so many, things you can buy at. But where do you want to buy? You want to buy, you want to use shops that you feel comfortable with. You want to buy at places where you feel loved, and where you feel comfy in being yourself. And I don't think there's much of a difference in the B2B world, to be honest.
It's an interesting concept to use this word, like it's something you want to be loved in this B2B environment, right? Like it's just like one of these words you wouldn't necessarily associate with the industry.
Well, as I said, usually you associate B2B with technical terms rather than emotional terms. But I think these times are done. We're done with it. We're sort of mashing things up. So I'm good at using these terms.
So looking at B2B, B2C, we've talked about this as length now, and like we thought about, okay, maybe they should be more alike, they should be more the same. But maybe we can focus for a little bit on why are they actually different. So what are the differences between B2B, B2C, and what should we be aware of? How do we make the transition from going slowly or solely from a B2B into a B2C kind of more mindset in a way?
Well, I think B2B is bigger. It scales faster. You don't only buy, say, one pair of shoes or a hoodie. You buy for projects. You buy, larger amounts of goods, of forklifts, for instance. You seldomly buy just one. You create a whole fleet of them. And you need sort of, I think the shop in itself needs to be more controllable, right? You have budgets that you need to take into account. You might need to, not have the level of authority, so you need the sort of technical landscape that mirrors this. And in itself, the B2B shopping experience is more complex than the B2C one. On a different level, but I would say it's more complex.
Okay, so complexity, of course, is the one thing. I think that in my experience is also about relationships. That I find these relationships between B2B buyers is oftentimes more long-term. It's more stable than between a company and a B2C customer, right? Because if I'm a B2C customer, I don't care. I just go where it's cheapest. If I want something, I just check where it's on sale. I'm not very loyal, right? But in a B2B environment, I think what I often see is that people really have a different need. So they really want peace of mind in a way that their supplier they can rely on their supplier, no questions asked, right? So these long-term relationships, essentially they reduce costs. So that would even be an additional argument for really thinking in customer needs, in relationship marketing, especially in the B2B market, because those relationships are so much more valuable there, and these long-term relationships are so much more valuable there.
I think relationship is a good term because we've seen sort of then COVID hit, but usually B2B is also associated with people selling on site, right? You might know the B2B seller actually, personally, which has been sort of digitalized due to COVID, but this creates loyalty. And I think this is a level of experience and a level of loyalty you want to sort of merge into your shop, into your digital world.
Yeah. And the complexity you mentioned earlier, this also something what I find it's definitely true, but what's the reason for that? So what's kind of like the concept of complexity? What's the root cause of that? And I think a lot of these projects, that what you are selling as a B2B company is just one part of the puzzle for the buyer, right? So they have this whole production process, the whole value chain, everything is just in time and it needs to happen quite smoothly. So the better you are able to understand what the other side needs, and the better you are able to integrate into what they are trying to do and what they are trying to accomplish and integrate into their processes, the better you will be able to understand those processes, the more successful you will be in selling whatever it is you're offering, the services, your products, right?
And I think trust is a huge value, because if you're not able to deliver parts or a good, you might jeopardize your customers' projects, right?
And there's real money involved there, right? It's not just, okay, maybe I forgot
huge amounts.
I forgot my grandma's birthday. Okay, I ordered this one day too late. Okay, they're going to make up some excuse, right? B2C, it's like nobody. It's not a big deal, right? You can always deal with that. But if that happens in a B2B environment, we're talking about millions of dollars.
Yeah. There's a level of sort of interdependency across products, which you don't happen to have in the B2C world.
Well, not to that extent, at least, right? Yeah. Okay, so imagine that I'm one of these B2B companies, and I may have started already. Like, I've read an interesting number that about 70% of B2B companies only make about 30% of their sales through digital channels. So let's say I'm one of those companies. Maybe I haven't even started at all. How do I get started? What do I have to do to get to kind of raise my B2B game, my digital B2B game?
If only was that easy to answer. I mean, I don't think there's a silver bullet, but I'm all for just trying things out. I mean, you can be wrong, obviously, but just try things. I mean, if your strategy is to be on-site focused, be on-site focused. If you need to change scope due to COVID, for instance, just change it. I mean, you can't be wrong, actually. If you try things out, you can't be wrong. I think the value of the experimentation, the value of trying things out will definitely lead to new insights, which I think are important. But I also see that many B2B companies, very traditional B2B companies, are hesitant in trying new things, which I think is the advantage of B2C companies, because they do it, day in, day out. They experiment, they do new things, they just try. And if things don't work, if they're not successful, just get rid of them. And I think this is a mindset and a new scope of a digitalized world that the B2B companies should also adopt to some extent.
And what role would you say organizational topics play in this? Like, these older mindsets, what you mentioned, like organizational change, having sales teams, for example. In your experience, how much of an impact could that be on not doing digital B2B?
A huge impact. I think still there are many dependencies across the sort of the matrix of the organization. But again, the experiment can liberate teams. I mean, if you are able to fail, it liberates you as a company, as an employee. And if you think about certain strategies or tactics and you're able to implement these, I think it's a good start.
Yeah, it's interesting because I saw that about 70% of B2B companies who have a sales team and do digital commerce. They actually said that 70% of theirs said that their sales team has not only stayed fully intact in numbers and in what they do, but also they were even able to hire more people. They were able to increase the number of salespeople. And I found that very interesting, because that's one of the greatest fears that I see, that there are people kind of reluctant to try digital things because we've always done it in a personal way, and jobs depend on that, and how do roles need to change. But kind of thinking of this as more of an opportunity, because I mean, we've talked about millennials quite a bit in the beginning, right? So let's say you have a sales team. You're not going to reach those people anyways if you're not selling to them already, right? So if you want to address new people, and you're not going to address these people with the sales team because they have different habits, well, then it's not really an argument to not try it out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a good point in saying that sort of the old world is very personal, very face-to-face. But then I think, why don't you use the technology at hand to create something personal? Be emotional in your language. Use storytelling. Use a video that just says, "Hello, my name is yada, 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 and this is my brand, and I'm happy you found your way onto my website. I mean, there's so many digital paths you can go to create a face-to-face conversation. You can create emotionalized experiences. As I said, try it out. I mean, if a video doesn't work, just don't use it anymore. But use different routes, different paths, like content intelligence. You look at what you have in terms of content. Look what you may want to have in the future. Use emotional language, use storytelling, be sort of the best and personal B2B experience you can be through digital channels.
Yeah. So we already talked about the mindset behind that. Maybe we can talk about tools, what would help me get that show on the road? What would be a good first step? Like how do I start? What kind of tools can help me in that journey?
Well, I mean, personalization definitely helps, right? You have different buyers, you have different visitors coming to your site, interacting differently with different topics, different content assets, content pieces. So use content recommendations, for instance, or use product recommendations, for instance. Use also, as I just mentioned, content intelligence. It's basically looking at topics you use, content you use, and find your way that works best for different audiences. And what I also think, and I'm very convinced that data is key. So you need a way of leveraging all sorts of interaction data coming from the ones that are most important to you, your buyers. So use a customer data platform, for instance, right, to store data against certain profiles. You may want to know what buyer A is why buyer A is different from buyer B, for instance, right? And then digitalize the experience differently based on data and based on your technology.
So what do you think the future is going to be like?
The future is going to see more and more digitalized channels, I think. I think we're talking about integration, not internally, but also into other companies' tech stacks. I think we will be seeing more personalized experiences in terms of content. I think the content realm is still used not enough. I think we will see storytelling. We will see emotionalization. We will see B2C strategies, I think. I think we will see a world where you don't necessarily talk about B2B and B2C, but about a mashup of both worlds. So maybe, I don't know, in 10 years, we might not even be talking about B2B and B2C anymore, but just about e-commerce as a whole.
Yeah, so this will basically be the goal of this talk, that we don't need to have this talk in 10 years.
Let's,
leave it at that. You already mentioned one or two technologies, one or two things that were key components. Like we already talked about the mindset that kind of needs to change in a way. We talked about organizational challenges. If we talk about technology in particular, something like what you just mentioned, product recommendations, maybe guided searches, etc. So really personal experiences for B2B buyers. What role would you say machine learning and the increase of data is going to play in making those more accessible, making those better experiences?
I think it plays a pivotal role. You can't have machine learning run without data. And data, I'm not talking about, your name. I mean, any interaction history you can get. Machine learning makes it easy for even small and medium businesses to create value, because there's so many decisions you can make that you can't actually make one because it's just too many. Let the machine do it. I mean, seriously. And data and machine learning just go together. You can't have machine learning without data, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So I think this is the future, and not only on the product side of things, but even more so on the content side of things.
Yeah. All right. So I'm looking at the time here, and I think we can talk about this for hours. We do have some more talks coming up, and we already had some other ones where we can really also talk about how to really get things on the road. But I think this was mostly about trying really to find out what needs to change on a mindset perspective, like what kind of things should we do. If I were to wrap up these the three key statements, right? So I think we're talking about thinking B2B more like B2C. So getting curious, getting excited to get to know the customers on the other side, really trying to immerse yourself into their experience. What do they need? What are their motivations? How do I create a relationship with them, right? So this would be the first thing. Then secondly, take care of your brand. Don't only look at customers, but also look at yourself. What are you good at? What are your strengths? And how can you leverage those? Can you create a brand and customer experience that really works? And one thing that I've particularly taken away from what you said is, well, basically just do it. Just get started. Just see what it does to you. Just start somewhere. Maybe if you don't know how to do this yourself, get somebody to help you with, somebody from the outside. But just be sure that you do something, because basically, and that's kind of what I took from the talks we had before, it's going to change, and it's changing a lot as we speak right now. If you're not part of this developments, then basically you have to ask yourself, will you be part of anything in a few years' time? So probably it's better to make a decision than no decision.
I absolutely agree. And I think if there's only one thing that the audience should, take away, I think it's every B2B buyer is also and always a B2C consumer.
Yeah. Well put.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then I think we're almost out of time. So let's wrap this up. Thank you very much, Marc, for being here today with us and for all these interesting insights. And I hope that to all of our viewers out there that you will have a great rest of the conference and enjoy the rest of the talks. And well, hope to see you soon.
Thanks.